and Megan McGuire with the City Planning Department. Thank you for your patience while we work through these technical difficulties. You know, you can have it completely ironed out and there will always be that one time that it just decides it's not going to work for us. So tonight we are reviewing the Land Use and Development Code. As Jen will go into in her presentation, we have been working on this since, I would say, early 2020. And tonight's a big night. We are hopefully making a recommendation to City Council. If a recommendation is made, what I'll end up doing is writing a report of the discussion, as well as any technical changes that come out of tonight's meeting. I do want to make just a couple of opening remarks about the Manitou Springs zoning code. In my professional experience, I would say the current code is broken. I'll be very frank. It is tough to work with. There is regulations all over the place. You can be looking in the right spot and then realize that there's something about the same topic somewhere completely different. And that can be very tough. And so what I think we are presenting tonight is a huge step forward for Manitou. I think that while nothing is ever perfect, this is a huge step in the right direction. So I look forward to hearing your feedback. Again, we can always make technical edits. This is not approved. However, this would be a recommendation. And with that, I think we can start the presentation.
Great, thanks, Hannah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see that? Looks like you can. I can see it on your screen. Great. So for the record, I'm Jen Gardner with Logan Simpson, the consultant that was hired by the city to help with this code update effort. And I'm just going to run through a presentation of the primary edits that we've made throughout the code and give you a little background. So as Hannah mentioned, we did kick off this project in late 2020, December of 2020. We had our official project kickoff in early 2021. And we went through a series of stakeholder interviews. We had a couple of public open houses. We had one public open house. It was virtual due to COVID protocols, and put out about, I think, 5 different questionnaires through that time frame. And that allowed us to gather our information and start to get our heads into the code and figure out what we needed to update specifically. We took that update information, we pulled it into an assessment report and presented that to Planning Commission and City Council via a joint work session in May of 21. At that point, it was well received, the direction that we were planning to take with this update. So we started diving into specific topics in June of last year. So we had several topic-specific joint study sessions. We engaged with a working group and had started to reorganize the code and start to put the pieces together based on the assessment report and proposed outline. We continued to have those working group meetings from in earnest from September of 2021 through July of 2022, just working through chapter by chapter, topic by topic, and oftentimes line by line, and really having some great conversations. In August of 22, we put out a full draft to the working group and did one more round of review and refinement, spent about a month really workshopping that, making sure we had all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed. Worked on making sure we had the right level of graphics that we were expecting. And then in September, we published it out for public review. At that time, we had an open house. It was pretty well attended, and took some notes from that final open house. And we posted the document online for public comment as well, and received a few comments and made some final edits. We met with our working group a couple more times after that open house just to make some additional refinements to get things ready for you this evening. And here we are at the adoption hearing. I want to say a gigantic thank you to our working group members. The folks you see on the screen here were our steadfast group that really worked through this document. We've had over 30 meetings with this working group in just under a year, so quite an effort. And we added up the hours, and we've come up to about 500 volunteer hours from these folks. And Gloria Latimer, one of your planning commissioners here, was a part of that group towards the beginning. So thank you for joining that and being a part of that as well, Gloria. But so thank you to all the folks on this list. We couldn't have done it without you. Just a few numbers. Like I said, we had 2 open houses, the virtual one at the beginning and one here towards the end. We did 38 different individual community member interviews, in addition to reaching out to all of the advisory boards from the city of Manitou, which really brought that number up to probably more than 100 folks that we met with at the beginning of the project. We had 6 questionnaires at the beginning of the project with over 300 questionnaire responses, 7 joint work sessions with City Council and Planning Commission, and then 12 meetings with those advisory boards that I mentioned. So we met with the Housing Advisory Board, the Historic Preservation Commission, Climate Action Working Group, the Open Space Advisory Committee, Urban Renewal Authority, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and Mobility and Parking Board. I always forget what the S means. So what have we done with this code? So we took, as Hannah said, your code currently is, it's a nest of regulation in a lot of different places. And so our first task was to combine and reorganize your existing regulations into a little bit more of an logical fashion. We renamed a lot of the chapters. So we've combined a couple of different titles into one title and renamed to these 7 chapters you see here. We've added graphics and tables and an organizational table contents at the beginning of each chapter to help navigate with clickable links to help you navigate to specific sections. And I just wanted to go over some of the top priorities just to remind all of us when we started this project. Some of the priorities were to reorganize and simplify the code, add graphics and tables, really try to promote language that preserve the character of Manitou Springs, provide basic commercial design standards, which kind of leads into that character, incorporate sustainability, improve the landscape standards, add parking standards in tandem with mobility. So there's been a big push from the mobility board to kind of repackage the term parking into mobility, and then simplify application procedures. So now I'm just going to go chapter by chapter through, and Hannah, I think you wanted me to just go through all of these in sequence, correct?
Yeah, I think what would be helpful is we do chapters 1 and 2, pause for discussion, and then chapter 3, then chapter 4 with pauses after each, and then so on from there, if that works. Perfect.
I can do that. Okay, so chapter 1, proposed changes. This is your general provisions. It's kind of the preview to the code. So we've combined some language in your existing titles 16 and 18 into this chapter and kind of streamlined some of that language. We added a severability clause, which will allow this whole section of the code to stand on its own. Clarified some non-conforming regulations. We didn't make a whole lot of changes to the non-conformities. It was more clarification language within the existing conditional uses and how that would work moving forward with non-conformities. Historic district conformance language was added. We added a reference to lots of record and defined that, and then added public acquisition provisions. We also added review and decision-making authorities so that as you're reading through the code and you hear the term planning director, it's defined in this first chapter. Same with city engineer, city planning commission, and city council. Chapter 2 is the zone districts chapter. One of the biggest additions to this chapter and one of the biggest conversations we've had throughout this code is to add a section on measurements, specifically looking at building height. So we've clarified how to measure building height, and I think that conversation is continuing to evolve to some degree. We pulled footnotes regarding building height from the dimensional standards tables and include them in this measurement section. Your current dimensional standards table has a ton of footnotes, and some of those were easily reorganized into this section for clarity. And we added a section on accessory projections. So if you have a standard building height of say 35 feet, We've written in some allowances that can extend it above that 35 feet, such as parapet walls, pipes and chimneys, and roof-mounted solar and HVAC equipment. We've added that church belfries can extend 5 feet beyond the building height, and a disclaimer that this is not intended to allow for additional floor. It's just for those additional appurtenances at the top of a building. We recreated your current graphic to try to be consistent with our other graphics. We included a couple of graphics here for you to kind of get a sense of the building height conversation that we've been having. This top image is roughly an image along Manitou Avenue in the URA, urban renewal area, looking at where the slope goes up to the south. That's on the right-hand side of the picture. We've had a lot of conversations about allowing a little bit additional height kind of behind that first row of buildings, given that the highway sits above there and there aren't as many constraints on that side of the road in that section of the city as some of the other areas. So we just prepared this graphic to kind of help visualize what the standards in this code would look like with 3-story buildings with a building step back on that 3rd floor. And if you did have taller buildings behind, they still don't tower over the buildings in front, and the height could just be increased a slight bit. The bottom graphic is actually a representation of an idea that has come up kind of here right before this hearing on a possible way to alter our building height measurement standard, specifically in this area on the south side. And if you can see this red line, the idea is that we could change this so that the building height is measured based on the existing grade. So if you take the existing grade and kind of extend it up kind of like a box or an envelope, so to speak, that you could kind of fill that box with your building height up to the 35 feet. What that does gain you, as you can see on this kind of this back building, if the building itself were to cut into the hillside, the measurement would be from that existing grade, and you may gain a couple of additional feet without really affecting the overall visual quality of the corridor. So just keep that in mind as we have our discussion here. Let me see, I think I had couple more on chapter 2, and we can come back to that picture if we need to have the discussion. Additionally, in chapter 2, we've added an affordable housing density bonus option, which will allow for an increase of 25% based on if 25% or more of the units are provided at a price that would equal what someone at 100% AMI or area median income could afford. So you could get a 25% bonus, which basically means, yeah, it's a 25% bonus. Okay, so we've added a couple of new zone districts in chapter 2. One is the mixed use commercial, which actually replaces your redevelopment overlay in that urban renewal area. We've allowed for building standards specific to the URA. That was a topic that has been brought up at the very beginning of this project, that area felt a little bit different and we needed to really refine some standards for that space. We've increased the density from 15 dwelling units per acre to 25 to accommodate a little bit of additional housing in that area. We've kept the building height at 35 feet. The lot coverage remains at 75%. We added a maximum front setback. So instead of allowing buildings to be pushed back too far, it kind of pulls buildings within that 10 feet to 20 foot range closer to the sidewalk. And we've clarified the development incentives. Your current code has some development incentives in this area. And so we've kind of worked those into the dimensional standard table for clarity. All right, so that is it on chapter 2. I will open up for some discussion.
Gary.
So to clarify, I kind of, as I was going through this, I'd kind of hoped I have a red line of some sort, just so I could see if something had changed or like, for example, you're speaking specifically to the new zone district increasing density from 15 to 25. Is that the only change in the things that you've listed out in this new zone district in those first two chapters where you've changed a number? So how would we, looking at this, know that, for example, if you changed a building height or a setback or anything, if any of these recommendations in this manual have changed, how would we know that?
Thank you, Commissioner Storm. We had put together an executive summary of changes that was sent out as part of the packet, I believe. So if I remember right, Jen, that the only changes occurred in the mixed use commercial zone district, and all the dimensional standards for the other zone districts remained the same. Actually, I think we did change the density of the high density residential district. I don't have a laptop, so I can't pull it up.
Yeah, and I'm trying to pull up a red line. I
I can
think we
answer that.
changed- Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
In the HDR, we increased height by 5 feet to 35. And I think that's the only change in HDR.
Why?
Why was it changed?
Yeah, why was it changed? I know,
Well, and just to clarify, when I say we changed, I mean this is a recommendation that the Code Update Committee has, and we're here tonight to deliberate and refine. And, maybe we won't want to go with everything, and that's our role. And I think it was, I can't explain why the height was changed to 35. I don't know if I missed that meeting or if it came out of some other meeting that some other, one of the boards or commissions proposed, but definitely it's on my radar too as concern. Okay, excuse me, we're not gonna, if you're gonna participate in this meeting. Okay, yeah, I'll let you know. We're gonna go through the presentation. The board will deliberate and then we'll open up for public comment. Okay, you'll get your chance to speak.
Okay, so just from my perspective, adding 5 feet, that's a sensitive thing, as we've learned. I would like to kind of understand better how the committee got there.
Okay, Hannah, if you were going to speak.
If I recall, again, for the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen, if I recall the discussion correctly, the idea was that the high density residential zone district needed to allow for up to 3 stories of potential of 3 total stories. The 30 feet doesn't really allow for 3 stories. 35 allows for a more modern floor plate to floor plate measurement, which tends to be about 11 to 12 feet per floor. So it wasn't really that 35 feet wouldn't accommodate a 4th story very easily unless you had very small, short floors. So the idea was that, we see a lot of 3-story buildings. 35 feet is much more modern height for a 3-story building, if I recall correctly.
Yes, that is exactly it, Hannah.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, Carrie, I'd just like to add as an architect, I think what we're trying to do with the zoning code is not to make things unnecessarily restrictive. And a lot of attention was paid to this building height question. I think from a design standpoint, the additional 5 feet doesn't bother me at all. It allows for more flexibility, and because of the setback requirements, I think it's well integrated into the cityscape.
Okay, I was thinking that we we'd ask questions and get as much clarification and then reserve the debate period for after we've gone through the whole thing and had the public comment. But definitely, that's, questions are, more understanding. If you don't understand why anything is in the proposal, it'd be fine to ask for clarification at this time. Tip.
I just had two questions for clarification. In terms of the AMI allowance of an additional 25%, is there some time frame in which that would expire? So for example, if I'm a developer and I build apartments and I take advantage of this allowance and able to add 25%, but then what if I sell it and it goes to somebody else who doesn't want to keep that provision, or after 10 years, does it expire? I just was wondering about that. That's the first question I have.
Hannah?
That's a great question. So that did come up during the city council work session, and we were going to write in a minimum deed restriction of 25 years, which is pretty standard, I think, for I guess the practice. So that would be added to the code.
And just for my own curiosity, how's that going to be managed? I mean, is it the planning department that's going to manage that? That seems like a lot.
It would be up to the planning department to enforce all of Title 18. So yes, we would be reviewing that like we review short-term rentals, like we review long-term occupancy, things like that. So as rents pop up, we would be able to tell if they were meeting their deed restriction obligations.
I don't think we have any more volume, do we? No, that's it. Unfortunately, every time the fan kicks up. Okay. Yeah, you could move up closer if you want. Move over where Hannah is, and she'll be answering most of the questions.
So just to follow up before I ask the other question, does that mean that the use has to continue for 25 years? You can't convert it, let's say, from apartments to condos or something like that in that 25 years?
So the deed restriction, if it's put in place for 25 years, would automatically fall off after that 25-year period. Could you change your use and still meet the deed restriction? Depends on how the deed restriction is written, but most often, yes. Most often you can meet the covenant that attaches to the deed that's restricting the affordability of the unit and still play around with the use within reason. So it could be sold as a condominium, and then any future seller would also have to sell for that 100% AMI until that 25-year drop off, or it could be rented out for that 25 years. So it could be either form of ownership under most deed restrictions, but you could opt to clarify that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then the second question, I read what you sent out a couple of weeks ago, and honestly, I just don't remember everything in it because it was such a thick file. The other thing I was curious about, when we developed Plan Manitou, we spent a lot of time on an issue that the public commented about quite a bit, and that was when you have two zoning property, I don't know how to put this, like you have a property that's being developed and it's in one zone and it abuts a neighborhood that's a different zone, that there has to be some kind of conformity, not only for the zone in which the property is located, but to make it fit the character of the surrounding properties. Is that does that continue in this?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so we did write in standards to account for that. So if you were to have a high density residential zone or a commercial zone next to a single family zone district, We did write in a reduced height requirement for a certain distance that would match the single family zone so that you couldn't have like, a 3-story or 4-story structure. I'm just spitballing a potential height next to a single family zone that couldn't accommodate that. Also, one of the potential later additions is that they would have to match the same setback. So if you had a commercial property next to a single family property, the single family side yard setback may be 10 feet, but the commercial zone district may be 5. So we're saying that when you have that adjacency, that you would mimic the setback that they share a property line with, just to keep the transition a little more smooth.
Alan,
Carrie?
how far does that adjacency requirement go?
It would be adjacent to any shared property line.
Okay, so I'm just curious. So you've got single family, then you've got high density, but so they're going to have to be set back. But the next high density next to the high density doesn't. I'm just wondering how far down the line does that adjacency apply? The first property?
That's correct. So that would the point is to help transition zone districts that are maybe not meant for the same type of development. But if you had 2 high density projects next to each other, the high density setbacks would apply on that their shared property lines. Yeah.
Tip?
Just 2 quick other questions. In terms of this issue, I would assume that a division by a road would still count.
That's a great question. So I might need Jen's help with this one, but if I recall correctly, and she might need to correct me, is that it would only be if they are sharing a property line, not if there was a right of way separating them.
So we'll talk about that later, right? The other thing is that in terms of the, just as a point of information for the recommendation for the 35 feet, would any of the provisions that allow for building above the number of feet allowed kick in for that?
That's another good question. So in the mixed use commercial zone district, as it's currently drafted, there is a allowance for an additional 4 feet if you met certain standards in this sustainability menu. So if you got a certain number of points, then you could bump up to 4, if I'm remembering right, Jen. I'm seeing a head nod, but if you got a certain number of points using the sustainability menu, you could bump up 4 more feet, but that's only 50 feet pushed back from that right-of-way line. So that additional 4 foot is one thing that we have written into the code to allow additional height. And then there's also, I believe, the potential projection into the maximum height, which would be for mechanical equipment, an elevator shaft or a parapet.
So none of that would be in the residential zones where we're kicking up to, where we would, the suggestion is to kick up to 35 feet.
The kick up to potentially 39 would just be applicable in the mixed use commercial zone district, which is essentially the URA area. And in the 4 feet or 5 feet additional allowance for parapets, mechanical equipment, stuff like that, I believe would only be applicable, or is that in all zone districts, Jen? Could you do a thumbs up?
All zone districts.
So it's really basically 40 feet that we're talking about in that residential neighborhood.
So if it was a single family zone district, the base is lower than 35. So I would have to look at the code, but I can be prepared to answer that question in a second.
We were talking about the high density, right?
Yeah, for high density, I think is what he was talking about.
For high density, that would be correct. Yeah.
It could go to 40. Yeah.
Yeah, but let me clarify that the building height itself wouldn't be allowed to go to 40. You would still measure to the top of the base of if it was a pitched roof, you would measure to the top of the pitch at 35. And if it was a flat roof, you'd still measure to the top of that flat roof at 35. And the only thing that could extend beyond that would be those additional roof appurtenances. So you couldn't actually get additional floor space up to 40 feet. It would just be those additional things that you find on top of a roof.
Yeah, yes, I appreciate. So I was thinking not only about the fourth floor, I was just thinking about sight lines and things like that.
Got it.
Okay, any more? Or are we ready to move on? Okay,
All right,
That
move
wa-
on.
Dale, we will do that after we've gone through all of the. Okay, if you want to participate, you will get your opportunity, but okay. Can we go to the next chapter then?
Great, I can do that. So chapter 3 is our development standards. This is a very lengthy chapter with a lot of information. And I'm just going to go through, kind of hit the highlights of what we've added. The commercial site and building design standards are all new. This is a whole new section speaking to specific building orientation, building height and scale. The biggest change is requiring this 10-foot step back. So after 28 feet, or basically the second floor of a building, you have to step a building back by 10 feet so that you don't get a bunch of tall, so you have some articulation to the building, and everything isn't just tall and what's the word I'm looking for? So you have that articulation, I guess, and some facade variation. We've added in some building roof material requirements to require some cool roofs. We've added development standards relative to Fountain Creek and a requirement for site amenities. The existing exterior lighting section is very minimal in your current code. It just has lighting plan requirements and not much in the way of standards. So we've added just a few standards to try to get you a little bit closer to dark sky lighting without being fully dark sky compliant. So we added a requirement for full cutoff fixtures, which means that the light needs to be downward directed and it can't direct upward. We've added standards to regulate light levels and colors as well. The landscape section, again, your current standards are fairly minimal. It does include a minimum number of trees for any site, street tree spacing, and a minimum number of plant materials, and some standards for what needs to be submitted with a landscape plan. We have added quite a bit to this section, some general landscape standards which reference the preferred plant list for the city. We've carried forward the landscape plan requirements, adding water usage identification, fairly similar to Colorado Springs. We've added vegetation preservation standards, so any tree above a certain size would need to be preserved or mitigated. We've added standards for specific areas such as streetscapes, commercial, and parking lot landscaping. So there's specific requirements and standards in each of those scenarios. And we've added a section on screening and buffering standards to help screen between two uses that might be competing. We've added a new section on alternative energy. There isn't anything on this topic specifically in your current code, so this is a new section. We've added electric vehicle charging infrastructure requirements and solar infrastructure requirements. We've added a pretty lengthy sustainable site improvement standards menu of incentives, which includes, which for all new residential and non-residential development, you are required to achieve 5 points off of this menu. And an additional 5 points can give you relief from additional standards. The sustainable site improvement standards topics include, there's some affordable housing items in there, additional electric vehicle charging stations, some low impact development, stormwater management techniques, pervious pavement, additional landscaping and trees, use of native plant material, rooftop gardens that can be accommodated in that step back that's required, and then renewable energy systems. So there's a variety of options to achieve those points. The mobility section, which is basically your parking section. The existing code has a parking plan requirement, parking space standards, and a minimum number of off-street parking spaces by use. We've simplified that parking, the parking requirement by use quite a bit. We've removed the minimum off-street parking requirement for downtown and added a maximum parking requirement citywide. added alternative parking plan options. So if a site plan, an applicant came in and felt that they did not need the number of parking spaces that were required, and they had justification for approving that, they can apply for an alternative parking plan. We've added shared parking standards. So if you have a day use building next to a night use building, they can share the parking and develop a program to document that. We've added bicycle parking requirements and standards and low impact development standards for stormwater management. This is just a snapshot of your new parking table or new proposed parking table, where we've condensed a lot of the uses into the overarching use categories to try to minimize the footprint of this, as well as we have reduced the required number of parking spaces in many instances. All right, let's stop here for discussion on chapter 3.
Okay, I just, one thing, I'm not sure if it came across there, but one of the proposals is to eliminate parking for the downtown zone. But the requirement, yeah, but except for residential and hospitality. So all, the shops and restaurants and so on no longer have a minimum parking requirement in the downtown. And something else that I think is significant is one of the suggestions is to allow an applicant to come up with an alternative parking plan. And, that's a way, we've had instances where people say, well, okay, I can give you 25 parking places, but we'll never use more than 10. So if they can come up with their rationale, they can have a shot at making that work. So, other questions?
Just a comment, I really appreciated all the updated graphics and the clarity that came to this chapter was such a huge step forward from what we had.
I guess we go on to the next. Oh,
Great.
What's a ecological characterization study?
Yeah, so that is something that we've added to the hazards. Let me get down to that section. I have the document open to my left here so that I can speak to that. The development in natural hazard areas. Your development in natural hazard areas was geared very much towards steep slopes and geologic hazards. And so actually Hannah and I worked to just roll in this ecological characterization study, which allows for a little bit of an expansion on that to look at other natural habitats or features. So it's basically just taking a look at if you have, say, a wildlife corridor or wetlands or a specific view corridor that's protected, or specific vegetation that needs to be protected, native vegetation. And this could come into play in some of the hillside low density area where you're in that urban rural interface. So I hope that answered the question.
anyone else have any questions on this? Any more, Mike? Okay, thank you. Guess we move on.
All right. So chapter 4, the highlight of this chapter is this new use table. Your current code has all of the permitted and conditional uses listed in each each zone district. And so we've pulled that into a table for ease of use. So you'll have a use category, which is what largely a lot of the parking regulations are based on. A use type, so we break it down to some specific use types. And then each zone district across the top has a notation for either permitted or conditional use. And then over on the right, you have your use specific standards, whether they have them or not. We did add a few new uses and update some of the existing uses. Some of the terminology was just a little bit out of date. So we tried to modernize the technology. We've updated permitted and conditional use allowances as appropriate, trying to reduce a little bit of a reliance on the conditional uses and provide permitted uses where appropriate. Some of the new uses we added a mixed use dwelling. Your current code has a residential above first floor, and it's a very lengthy description. So we've repackaged that as a mixed use dwelling and given it a little different definition. Group home, which includes youth homes and adult homes, so any type of group housing. Recreational entertainment, maker spaces, breweries, distilleries, and wineries, workshops, transit facilities, solid waste facilities, recycling facilities, and a number of temporary uses, including clarification on special events, art and craft fairs, and a produce stand. Residential uses, we did tune up these a little bit, and I think most of you who were part of the work group or work sessions last year will remember that we are removing the word family from the code. So instead of a single family detached dwelling, it's now a single household detached dwelling with a definition for household. So we have a single household dwelling, a 2-household duplex dwelling, mixed use dwelling, multi-household dwelling, which is like your apartment complexes, mobile or manufactured home, and the group homes. In our commercial districts, commercial zone districts allowances, we wanted to differentiate the commercial zone district from the downtown and from the MUC. So we have those 3 commercial-based zone districts: the commercial, the downtown, and the mixed-use commercial, which is basically your urban renewal area. And we just wanted to make sure that they were all differentiated slightly. So in your commercial zone district, all dwelling types are allowed except single household dwelling, which is a little different than downtown. We allow group living uses, micro agriculture uses, most commercial and office uses, which should be standard, the marijuana uses. Most of the institutional public uses are allowed in commercial, and most infrastructure and temporary uses. So your commercial district is probably one of the most generous districts that allows a lot of different uses. Short-term rentals is another use that we changed a little bit. So I'll say a lot of the short-term rental language is still the same. A lot of the standards are still the same, requiring fire suppression and different things within the short-term rental, which are also, I think, called vacation rentals in your current code. We did change the application from a conditional use permit to just a specific short-term rental permit. Any existing conditional use permits will not change. They will remain in effect unless something triggers enough of a change to make the existing permit invalid, which would trigger a new permit. And then the 2% saturation and 500-foot separation do still apply. And that is it on short-term rentals. Or on, sorry, chapter 4.
Okay, and so questions now?
Just to be clear, I think a major change on short-term rentals was the need for the owner to live in the house. That's huge. Which is,
Okay, anyone else at this point? Okay, great.
All right.
Get your chance. Yeah, okay. Let's move on.
Okay, thank you. Chapter 5 is the subdivision regulations. This is probably the smallest chapter, minus maybe chapter 1. We moved all of the procedural language into chapter 6. So chapter 6 has all the application procedures now, including subdivision procedures. We modernized the purpose statement. The subdivision regulations are the ones that have probably been the least updated over the history of Manatee Springs. So we updated a lot of the language and the purpose statement, added clarification to the applicability at the front end of the chapter. We did provide some new graphics and clarification on the definition of flag lots and some requirements within those. Clarified when and how improvement guarantees are used, and then updated the land dedication requirements. And I believe that is all on chapter 5.
Okay, any questions at this point? Okay, we can move on.
All right. Chapter 6. As I said, all of the application procedures throughout your current code have been combined into a new chapter. We created this new procedures table. This might be Hannah's favorite part of this whole code. It really guides each application type, whether a pre-application meeting is required, who the review authority and decision-making authority are. So I think this is a really helpful guide for any applicant, staff, and so on to use. We do have public notice, whether submitted notice or public hearing notice is required as well. And then throughout the chapter, we've clarified the public notice procedures. You had some inconsistencies between applications, so we've combined those all and created a consistent structure. We did add a new public notice for when an application is received. So when an application is received, notice will go out to residents within a certain distance of a property, partially because we've also added an option for a neighborhood meeting. So then people can know that there's an application in effect and get involved in the project rather than just at the tail end when things have already been decided. We developed more specific criteria for variances. There's 2 required criteria. And I will say City Council did suggest maybe one of the additional criteria to move up to required. So that's a discussion we'll want to have. But for right now, there's 2 required criteria and 7 additional criteria that you need to meet 5 of those. We've replaced minor conditional use with that specific short-term rental application process. So now you just have a conditional use rather than minor and major. So obviously major is now just a conditional use. And we updated the subdivision plat decision-making authority to administrative due to your development plan process. That's the process that we envision being ushered through Planning Commission and City Council with all the detail, and the actual plats that come through with the subdivision can be administratively approved. And we've added a waiver of replat process. And I believe that is all for chapter 6. Any questions?
Okay, questions? I have a couple. When you look at the table, one of the items is waiver, and there's no authority. It's sort of blank all across. And I was just curious, like the one that's of interest to me is a subdivision waiver, because that usually is something we have a public hearing on. So I was curious what the thinking is on that.
Thank you, Chair Delwich. That is intended to be the subdivision waiver. That must just be an oversight. So we'll fix that. We didn't have an intention of changing that review authority.
Anybody else? Mike?
On the neighborhood meeting topic, I remember being told that we as a commission cannot attend those. So that might be something you want to add for future reference.
Anything else? Yeah, I guess when we get to our discussion, we can sort of go over this variance thing. I don't know, Jen, do you remember which item it was that council recommended adding to mandatory?
Yes, let me get down to that section. It was let's see, it was the one. Sorry, I'm trying to read through them here. Oh, it was number 2. There are no design alternatives or alternative locations for structures. It was recommended that that should be a standard criteria, not one of the options.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, then let's move on.
Okay. Chapter 7, pretty straightforward. We pulled all the definitions throughout the titles that we were looking at into one section. We moved all of the use definitions to chapter 4, and this is more just terminology definitions. The sign code definitions have been placed separately in this chapter, just to call them out specifically as a group, and they've been updated according to the new language or any updated language. Any standards have been removed from definitions. So if there was a definition that, for example, that might specify a specific setback or building height, that has been removed and just placed in the proper location elsewhere in the document. We've better defined accessory structures. Your current code under the dimensional standards just talks about a temporary structure or temporary structure and a permanent structure. And we've clarified that those are the accessory structures and how those are determined. And we've reviewed and updated all the telecommunications definitions to make sure that they're up to speed with federal standards. And that is it on chapter 7.
Hey, I just realized I've been rude here. Justin or Gloria, would you have any questions you'd want to add in? Okay. Any other questions?
May I ask a question about the previous chapter that came to me now?
You sure can.
Thanks.
You
Just
can ask on any of the
Okay,
chapters.
I wasn't sure about that. So this is just an inquiry. I understand the second requirement that is a necessary one to grant a variance. I just wondered, when we say that that's a necessary requirement, how serious are we? Because I could think of somebody saying, I would rather develop this part of my property and I need a variance to do that. And it's going to be more aesthetically pleasing. It's going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to let me do with my property what I would like to do. And other properties in my community have done that. And it might be that those are all true. These are things that come up in front of us, but it might not meet that second requirement, which is that if there are alternatives, you may not be granted the variance. Do you see what I mean? So I just would kind of like to know, maybe the planning director would help us with this, or our lawyer, but are we serious about that? Or is that a general thing that we think is serious, but we might abrogate it?
That was actually city council that came up with that.
Well, yeah, so whoever has expertise to shed, I mean, I think that there's good reason for it. We're not debating it right now. I just want to know, are we serious about it, or is it too under consideration to be changed?
Okay. Hannah, do you have anything to add on that?
Thanks for that question. So with all applications, our hope is that when they're decided on, that they're meeting the review criteria. And I understand that the existing criteria are really onerous and almost impossible, if I dare say impossible. So it would really be up to the commission or whoever the review authority was, to make a decision that the application met the standards. And if they felt that it didn't meet one of those required standards, then maybe the application would need to be denied. But that's a great question for deliberation tonight. Is that one of the ones that should be required, or one of the optional ones?
Thank you very much. Because even though it's virtually impossible under the current language to be granted a variance, but we grant them all the time. And so that's exactly what I'm trying to get at in terms of moving forward.
That's what we're trying to fix.
Kind of on that same topic on short-term rentals. I've said this before, that we kind of created a checklist, and it still requires a conditional use, correct? On your,
For short-term rentals, we would be getting rid of the conditional use requirement in lieu of a short-term rental permit for new applications,
Okay,
new
okay.
locations.
all right. So, but they all still would go in front of the planning commission.
As it's currently proposed, the proposal of a new location would initially be approved by the city planning commission, but the annual renewals, as long as there wasn't a change in anything, would be administrative. But the approval of the new location would first go to planning commission.
Okay, so if the applicants met all the criteria, 500 feet, et cetera, how could we, maybe the other way around, if they didn't meet that, could the homeowner come in front of us and ask for a variance and plead their specific case? In other words, can we as a group say, okay, in this case, 400 feet is acceptable?
Under the current code, they would be eligible to make the request, but it would be up to the planning commission to decide if the request was valid.
Okay, well, that's great, because that's
Please. Wait your turn.
that has,
You're gonna have to leave if you can't follow the rules.
that's great to hear, because historically, that's at least that's not the impression I got. If they met the criteria, it was almost a rubber stamp, and we didn't have any chance to make changes.
Turn your mic on.
You asked if they didn't meet the criteria, whether it could come before the committee. So, but so when you said that's great, if it meets it, it still comes before the committee anyway, but we can't deny it.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm asking.
They should be looked at on an individual case-by-case basis, and we should have some flexibility to approve or deny, as opposed to basically a checklist.
Okay, so we're asking questions now. Did you get your question answered?
I
Or do you
actually still have that. I don't know the answer to that question yet. Like, first of all, you said under current code, are we talking about the current code now or the current code under consideration? And I guess that just as a point of information, in terms of the code that we're deliberating about tonight, whenever one of these applications comes before the planning commission, does the planning commission have to approve it if it meets the checklist? And then on the other hand, may it make exceptions? Maybe we've already saturated the 2%, and then the planning commission say, yeah, but we think that this makes sense and we're going to do it anyway. Those are the two things that I think we need to have an answer about in terms of this proposal.
To take a stab at answering the question, so under the current code, the one that's active right now, not the proposed version that we're reviewing tonight, it's the same checklist that we are carrying forward. So if you felt like you had to approve with the conditional use as short-term rentals have come in, it would be the same process moving forward for that initial hearing. So we're not proposing to make any changes between what you've reviewed in the past and how you would review them in the future. Just the mechanism would be different.
Well, I think there's a problem with the current way it's designed. And I know I've harped on this before, but it's basically a checklist, and it really, the way it is now, should be administratively approved, because we don't seem to have any authority to have any flexibility. And I think we should in the future.
Okay, I think when we deliberate, we can tweak it how we want. Because we're we're looking at a draft and then we'll modify the draft and push it forward to council. So we can have latitude to add what we want. Any other questions? So now we are done with our review and we can open this up to the public for public comment. And if you'd like to comment, step to the table and state your name and address for the record and say what you want regarding this meeting.
Hi, folks. My name is Megan Day. I live at 12 Capitol Hill Avenue in Manitou by Marymount Castle, neighbor to some of you. First, I want to thank all of you for this monumental effort. You have put in so many hours of volunteer time, of staff effort, of consultant time. So thank you. Really, this has been a monumental effort and you're very well along in the process. So congrats and my gratitude as a citizen for your volunteer service and staff expertise. I am here as a zoning nerd. I'm a planner and I've read a lot of code and I was actually pretty heartbroken to read some of the provisions in this new proposed zoning code and development plan. And many great things in there. So again, great job. And thank you for all of these good changes and streamlining. There's still chance to make some tweaks. So that's why I'm here in hopes that you can make some minor changes that would make this plan help facilitate more equity and sustainability in our city. And so let me just go through some of these. I defer to our commercial experts, Farley and others on what's right for the commercial districts. I live downtown, and so I'm really just speaking to the high density residential district and what might be changes that you could make just to that zoning district that would help us make our town more equitable, affordable, and sustainable. And so those minor changes include the minimum lot frontage for one. I have several. The minimum lot frontage for the high density residential district is set, I believe, at 50 feet. And so this, like several other provisions that I'll speak to, is really designed for a more suburban, sprawling, spread out community, which translates into a less affordable community. So in the downtown area, for example, I was under contract for a small lot. I was under contract because it was affordable, and it was affordable because it was small. It had a 25-foot lot frontage. And so I would advocate for you to have that, have the 50 feet and go to a 25-foot lot frontage in the high density residential district. Let Crystal Hills be Crystal Hills and be suburban and spread out and in that existing landform. But really some of these provisions, and I'll get to a couple more, are going against the historic built environment that already exists in Manitou downtown and makes many of these land use sort of forms that have been affordable in the past, it makes them illegal. And so I want to make sure that we can preserve the ability to develop small homes on smaller lots with more density in the way that we've always had in Manitou. And we're in an affordable housing crisis, really, across the country and in Manitou as well. And I don't want to continue to make our city more and more inaccessible to folks who work here, right? To our city staff, our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, to which I'm married to one, right? We don't want to make a community where these folks cannot live, they can only work. So minimum lot frontage is one, the other is minimum lot area. So in the high density residential district, you have a minimum lot area of, well, 15 dwelling units per acre, per acre. That translates into, if you split it all out, 2,900 square feet per lot. If you build 15 units, right? 2,900 square feet per lot is again, a pretty suburban land use form, right? In a city, you often, and I actually talked to a consultant at our state, we were at the state planning conference as planning nerds. Sure, is it hard to hear? Okay, understood. Thank you. I spoke to an expert on a consultant across the state and what is appropriate for a high density residential district. And he really said that many cities have a minimum lot size of 1,400 square feet per lot, right? So 2,900 square feet per lot is very large, and that's spread out. It's not high density. And so I would advocate that you switch from 2,900 square feet or 15 dwelling units per acre to something more along the lines of 1,400 square feet per acre in the high density residential district. As an example, many of you might be aware of the house that burned down on Pawnee. That is a 1,300 square foot lot. And so you would still be requiring more area than that. And this is a 1,400 square foot per dwelling unit is something that supports like row houses, like something what you have on Manitou Ave, right? Where you have some very small houses right next to one another. That's about a 1,400 square foot lot size would support that smaller home development. Another provision is the height. The increase to 35 feet, I think is great. It gets us a little bit more towards, being able to support more density and more housing, which is really what we need in the high density residential district. I would encourage you to go much higher in, where the vacant lot that's huge. We have such a great opportunity for affordable housing and apartments on the LaFawn property, and that's in the URA, former URA. So I'm not going to speak to that because I'm not an expert on the commercial side, but so that height increase, I would definitely support keeping that. Setbacks, we have, my neighbors above me, they share a staircase up to their houses and they don't have any kind of setback, right? They have maybe 2-3 feet from the property line in order to get those buildings next to one another, one of which has a 20-foot lot frontage, right? So again, this is the historic land use form that we have downtown, and I want to support keeping that and not making it illegal to develop in these similar ways or redevelop. And another one is maximum lot coverage. Our houses are covering much of this lot in order to fit on these smaller lot areas. So I would support an increase in the maximum lot coverage to allow that. And then parking minimums. What we see across the country right now is that many cities are getting rid of their parking minimums. And it's a strategy to make your community more people focused, more walkable, and less car centric. And that's what we were developed as downtown. And I really think that we have to get rid of, in the high density residential district, we have to get rid of parking minimums. It doesn't mean that there won't be parking. Any developer who's developing market rate apartments is going to put in parking or, condos or whatnot. It just means that if you're trying to build a more affordable home or multifamily residence, that you don't have to spend so much money and space on parking. And maybe you could even support some communities that don't own cars, or maybe they choose to take the bus, or maybe they are disabled and can't drive. Or maybe there's plenty of parking on the street where we have lots of pavement already to support that. I know this is highly contentious, but this is the future of where a lot of cities are going. And we only overhaul our zoning code every, 10 years or more. And this is our opportunity now to look toward the future and eliminate those minimum parking requirements. In doing so, support more affordable housing development. And then finally, I would say in the definitions, there is a definition of household, and it defines a household as no more than 5 people who are related by birth or marriage. And so if you are not related by birth, marriage, adoption, et cetera, you can have no more than 5 people living together. And I don't think it's the government's business how we choose to live together. It's also preventing affordable housing situations. When I was a senior in college, I lived together with 7 people in a house. We each had our own bedroom. That is not overcrowding. That is a big house that I was able to, as a student on financial aid, afford to live in. It supports affordable housing. We also have communities here that are communities of choice, right? We have the 12 tribes. That's a communal living situation that they're not all related. We have LGBTQ communities who are families of choice rather than of birth or marriage. And I think we should be supporting that. I don't think it's the community's business, the government's business, who lives together and why they choose to live together. And so I would advocate for eliminating that 5-person maximum of unrelated people. So those are my comments. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks. Just one clarification. You mentioned a lot the HDR zone. And were you alluding to like downtown, or where were you? Because right now we don't really have a lot of areas that are HDR. You know, we have.
I haven't been able to see a map. So I
Okay.
don't know where your
I
HDR
can-
is. I'm talking about all of downtown and the historic areas that have been
Yeah.
highly dense in the past.
Yeah.
As an example, my own house used to be a boarding house. There were numbers
Sure.
on the bedrooms upstairs. There were 3 cottages plus a sleeping like cottage. So that certainly violates all kinds of things in this code currently. I would add also, like, where are your ADUs? We have to allow ADUs. And I know that there's been a lot of work on that, but I don't see it obviously in this zoning code review. And I'm confused as to where it is, but
Okay,
I
I
think we
can
should allow.
answer that for you. Early on in the process, City Council directed staff and directed the group to defer ADUs till next year. So it's not in there, and it probably won't get there since council is the ultimate decider on this, and they've already said we don't want to consider it this year. Regarding HDR, currently we have 3 properties that are HDR. There's one along Becker's Lane. And then there are 2 on El Paso right across from the skateboard park. And that is the extent of our HDR.
I wasn't able to find a map, so I did not realize that. So
Yeah.
I'm talking about all of downtown. Is
yeah,
that all
okay.
general residential?
Yeah, it's all general.
Oh my God.
Okay, well,
So
thank you.
my comments are multiplied by 3, 4. You've got to make downtown high density. We already are.
Yeah,
And you're
okay.
making us illegal in how we've had our built environment.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Well, we haven't, people have been grandfathered in. Obviously,
right.
all the building that was done before most people had vehicles, they didn't think about that. So, that's
But what you
there.
have is a lot of, garden apartments that are going to be torn down pretty soon because people want to redevelop
Yeah.
there. And now they're going to be forced to develop one home, and we've lost 4 or 5 apartments.
Okay. Well,
So-
thank you.
Please make our community more sustainable, more affordable, and more equitable. Thanks.
Megan, or leave, please. Thanks for your comments. That was valuable. But when you mentioned 15 dwelling units per acre, you switched over to square footage during your conversation. I don't remember the number you used, but what dwelling unit per acre would you recommending from 15
Who's
to
got a
what?
calculator? 30? Okay.
From 15 to 30?
Yes.
And I'm just I think your input is valuable, but when you change, for example, the street frontage from 50 to 25 for your recommendation, and then you consider all the other setbacks, doesn't that kind of greatly reduce the footprint of an available house that could be built?
I
Are
think
you-
you also have to minimize the setbacks.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
But aren't setbacks advantageous?
I don't see them as advantageous.
Well, I'm just trying to learn because you know more than I do. Well, side setbacks are for firefighting reasons mostly and for house maintenance, et cetera.
Mhm.
So if you were to increase the lot size and do what you're proposing, you're encouraging a good sized house on a small lot.
Right.
There's prices to pay for that too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can reduce the setbacks. You shouldn't eliminate them. So like 2, 3, 4, 5 feet, but no more. As far as, I mean, we have houses on Waltham where you have I was here for a zoning code review for a variance where they have their garages right on the street. And the houses sometimes are right on the street too. We have a house above us that's actually over the street. It pokes out onto the street. And it's very tiny and it's affordable little apartment. If you don't allow that kind of development, then you don't allow affordable housing. So really we have to minimize those setbacks in order to allow a buildable home on a smaller lot. Mhm.
I just was wondering if you could say a little bit more. You've talked a lot about affordable housing. I guess I would be curious about connecting dots in your mind. What would prevent somebody from just doing a huge mansion with few setbacks and more coverage on the property and it have nothing to do with affordable housing?
You do have a height restriction, so that would prevent some huge mansion. And you would get some, I mean, there's no requirement to make affordable housing. It's
Right.
just, a lot is more affordable if it's smaller.
So there, it's an assumption that it would lead to more affordable housing, but I'm not sure that it's a certain.
You're right.
certainty.
It might not. We might get some bigger houses on some smaller lots. And that's a risk we take. It just means that the land would be more affordable to buy and that might allow more people who can't currently move to Manitou to have that option.
Okay, I think we should move on and let other people speak. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission.
All right, could you start by stating your name and address for the
My
record,
name is
please?
Dale Laddie, 511 High Street, Manitou Springs, Colorado. Can you? Okay, well, I'm gonna go like this and that's it. Okay. It's hard for me to jump in and make comment with all of the hard work that's been done up to now from, all of this group and other community inputs, staff, et cetera. But there was a recent meeting, I'd say within the last 6 weeks ago, where the Park and Rec Board, I think they're still called that, decided that the contractor's work wasn't quite finished. And everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief because everybody knew it. And sometimes the railroad locomotive gets up some momentum based on actions that may have even been misplaced from the beginning. And I could tell the story about how this grant was funded for this operation and for this planning and for which we need. And it's been by and large good. But there are things in terms of the red line that was asked for that are unknown in terms of the changes that were prior to and now. And that's a very simple way to look at things. And I asked for it several weeks ago, a couple of months, as a matter of fact. I know of other people that have asked for it. And nothing has been forthcoming. So, I mean, I'm just kind of expressing a little bit of discontent that valid comment can't be done without total, or at least relative understanding of the changes between then and now. Some great topics here. I'm happy to have been a part of some of them before in terms of, the housing and the creativity side for what it might take from a financial point of view and a planning obstacle point of view, which I think we still have. And that's not to say it's a negative thing. It's to say that how do we remove every obstacle in order to achieve? And I think it really can be said in one word: experimental. If you have experimental provisions in your code, you have flexibility that I've heard wanting here. You have variance capacities that can be considered on the merits of the proposed experimental project. I've seen it done in other locations. I've been involved in the creation of it at the county level and other locations. We have consistently gone towards a system of regulatory, not only difficulty, but in some cases, and I've heard several this week, our favorite lady at Swirl has a great idea, can't do it. Okay, if it was experimental, you could do it, or at least consider it. So let me move along on the limited time that I have. I can only be here for myself in terms of what I say, how it affects me in terms of 18.42.030, non-conforming structures. And as planning commissioners, I'd ask for all of you to look at the changes that have been made to that section on a red line basis. Not only for me, but for other people who fall in that property ownership category. There are a number of problems with some of the changes that have been made to that. So they don't affect me because I have my permit applications in, but it's not good public policy what has been done with 18.42.030. As far as affordable housing, I think the only option is a cooperative structure with private financing. And I've been on it for 5 years. Cooperative structure, which could fall under a PUD, land unit development, and at least you'd have a racetrack to run on. We have consistently left it off the table for affordable housing and PUD, even experimental. Variance is vital. We cannot be legislated into no options, and I'll be the first one to bring them forward if I see them in the future, ex post facto. Mr. Casey's questions on the environmental requirement is a question really about what is my additional cost to consider the development of a piece of property. Okay, let's get right to the nub. When we got the idea that we needed engineering for structural and geotechnical, we were told that that's going to be on an as needed basis. No, it's for every single project. If I'm wrong, correct me, please. Anna. Geotechnical for a makeup.
Would you please?
Okay. I'm pointing it out. The regulatory regime apparently has some questions among your own membership, and I didn't hear any answers. So I don't know what the questions are. The answers, because I don't fully understand the question. I hope the commissioner will pursue that to his satisfaction. Just some amazing stuff that this community can come up with. Ms. Megan, a planner, if her ideas aren't directly considered to be implemented, I would be ashamed because she had some great stuff to say. As for me, I'm only concerned about my own legal situation, but I think what we're doing is we're legislating more difficult, creative options for ourselves, by and large, that if we don't have an experimental section in this code, we're SOL. From a legal point of view, because we'll always get the request for do more. Just take it forward on an experimental and see where it goes. One last thing, I've said it before, and I think it applies more as time goes. And that's the idea of an ombudsman position in a city, town, an ombudsman. It's a lost art of social interactive processing. And an ombudsman holds a different set of principles and legal obligations. The employees, all the conflicts that go on in this city, which are numerous, and I don't hear very many. But the ones that I do hear are typical ombudsman issues. If you look in the history of what an ombudsman is, I think we need one in this town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say something?
Sure, Mike.
Hey, Dale. My question earlier was about an ecological characterization study, and I apologize, I didn't bring my iPad. I don't see the whole code, but that is defined in great detail in the code.
Okay, and I support that in general. But it's the requirement for all such studies and requirements to develop that sometimes we get carried away on. That was only my point. And I hope that your concerns are met as you go forward.
Would anybody else like to speak?
Good evening, Planning Commission. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Good evening, Planning Commission. Darlene Kennedy, 18 Via Loma, and I'm on the committee. You keep thanking us, but I'd like to thank you for allowing us to do this. It's been an amazing experience. We have all become friends. We have all respected each other. We've agreed to disagree. Hannah has been a wonderful champion, and so has Jennifer. We discussed some of these issues in great length, over and over. The height of buildings, the density per acre, affordable housing. We created subcommittees to study these things. So we didn't do this in a vacuum, and we did it from the heart, and because we love our community. Density is a very serious thing. We have a finite amount of water. We have a finite amount of firefighters and police officers. And the same thing with height of buildings. Our fire department can only go so high, and we only have so many volunteer firemen. And fires are a real concern. Affordable housing, yes, we'd love it. But Mr. Reagan, you're absolutely right. We can allow more and more houses, but that doesn't guarantee affordable housing. And we are a small community. We would love to have affordable housing. And that's why we put some of these incentives into the code, hopefully. And Hannah has worked very hard to assure that if she allows affordable housing, that there will be deed restrictions, and they will be there for 25 years, and they will enforce them. So we have tried very hard. And I do want to thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to do this.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? Whitney.
Whitney Lewis, 124 Pawnee Avenue. I hesitate to give too detailed critical comments about the code because I know, or the proposed code, because I know how much work our community members have put in. And so it feels disrespectful to do so, especially, you know, I do trust the members who volunteered their time, but I do want to caution that I wish that there was, you know, a red line version to go back to and see why certain codes, how exactly they were changed, and be able to kind of track the thought process behind it. Instead of coming here and saying why, and hearing we think it was, or if I remember right, and that makes it hard to make informed decisions. And so I guess I would urge the commission to slow down and kind of have that available for us to look at. And then I think I had to look up what ombudsman was. But as other people were presenting, that's exactly my thoughts that were going through my head. Is I live in a townhome, but it's really me and one other neighbor, and our walls connect. And so we have no setbacks on the side. And so we are, by nature of peaceful living, forced to figure that out. And so when he needs his electric box, he comes into my backyard. And so we are forced to kind of to work together as a community. And I think we try to regulate human behavior more than we try to help us get along better and kind of see some of these bigger issues. And so in that same scenario, a large house was built behind us, blocking our views. And so that's another instance of what could happen. And it does, that person's quality of community has been decreased since then because of that action. And so I think that's just part of it. And in consequence, our homes became more affordable. So for it to say that it doesn't create affordable housing is not necessarily always true, because there are unintended consequences that are, a lot harder to envision because they're not immediate. And so I guess that's all of my comments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, then we'll close the public hearing part of this, or the public comment. And guess maybe we could sort of go around and Steve?
There seems to be a lot of interest in this red line version. Is there some way we can accommodate them?
Hannah, is there any?
Thank you, Commissioner Graybill. So tonight there would not be a way to accommodate that. We started with a red line version and it became a bleeding document. We scrapped a lot of stuff. And so in lieu of that, we went with the executive summary of changes so that you could actually follow what was going on. It was even tough. A red line version was even tough for me to follow. So we abandoned that concept in lieu of an executive summary of changes. If you would like a summary, a red line, we could give you what we got. It just wouldn't be as helpful as I think you're thinking it might be.
Hannah, is the executive summary posted online publicly?
Yes, it's posted where the draft is posted.
Okay, well, anybody like to start with their list of things they'd like to change or fix or support? David?
Just for clarification, we're required today to come up with any recommendations that we have because the city council is going to review this in December?
That's correct. They laid out the schedule. We had 3 weeks to review. And the idea was that we would have a hearing and hear about it and talk about it, and any tweaks or adjustments we want to make with the draft, that's our responsibility to do that. So. I mean,
My first suggestion is we get heat in here because it is really, really cold in here, honestly. So I don't know, this is in no particular order.
a little closer to the mic.
No particular order. I have to like get my notes up here. But I had already mentioned the issue about it's gonna be kind of repetitive, but you'll see, you'll know what I was thinking about it. The idea about how when you have two adjacent districts that they have to be in compliance in some way. And I do think that a road has to be included in that. It can't just be, this is my opinion. I just don't think it can be that the properties abut, because you can have a very residential side on one side of the road, and then you can have this, you know, a Walmart that would be building on the other side. Go ahead.
So the code actually does address that, and it does measure it from the setback. So, or from the property line. So I think it's 40 feet. Is that what we decided? Something like that. So the transition is to the first, I think, 40 feet of the adjacent property line. So if there's 40 feet of frontage, open space right of way, then you don't have to step down. But don't quote me on the 40 feet, but there is a certain distance.
It's 20 feet.
Okay, thank you.
It's 20.
And that, I think that was addressing HDR specifically.
Can I give an example from the past?
Yes.
That maybe will give you an idea of my concerns. That over a decade ago, there was a property that there was a proposal that came forward, and it was a property that was almost like an island, and there was a street on the one side of the property and a street on the other side. The street on this side was more toward the downtown. The street on this side faced the neighborhood, and the the developers wanted to basically have a huge wall with everything being the back side of the building, you know, with trash and exhaust and steam and all that kind of stuff. No design guidelines. It was just going to be that this neighbor was going to be looking at. No neighborhood was going to be like, so that when we did Plan Manitou, that was the kind of thing that we were concerned about in Plan Manitou, to say that there has to be some kind of relationship between what's being developed and what is across the street from it. So it's not just only a question, it has to do with sight lines. It has to do with what because that also faces a street, it should have a streetscape. There are a lot of different issues. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable if there's no language that is going to, in a way, protect our neighborhoods when you have, do you see what I mean?
I do, and I think that does get to a different issue that may not be directly addressed.
Tip, I had sort of played around with some language, and I was going to suggest something like, if adjacent properties are of differing zone districts, front, side, and rear setbacks shall adhere to the most restrictive.
I think that's a great starting point, and to say that that includes the divided by a street. But I also think that it might be good to say that that the design should also be, the designs should be in keeping with as well. That it's so that you don't just have, like, you might meet the setback and you might meet a setback and you might meet height, but it could just be a wall that isn't in keeping with the neighborhood at all. And so I think that there has to be some language about that as well.
Okay, you know, one of the things I think we talked about early on was having some kind of design guidelines for residential, and we talked about deferring that till after this code adoption, and that would be a new project to come up with that.
I think if we adopted the language that you say, that would be a good starting point. My impression is that the Code Manitou is still in effect, even with this new proposed document, right?
That's correct. And I do want to add on to your comment. I just looked something up. So in addition to the setback transition and the height transition, we need to remember that there's also these development plan mechanisms that we're writing into the code. And with those development plans come a certain set of review criteria. And with those review criteria, the planning commission or whoever has the review authority can determine if it's compatible with the surrounding area. So while there may not be a black and white code requirement to do X, Y, and Z, it's hard to predict every potential
Right.
situation.
Right.
But with those review criteria, you would have the ability to determine that something did or didn't work.
I think that's good. And so I would be happy with Alan's language if it were included. And that would be my proposal. And that I appreciate what you're saying. I appreciate the club Manitou, the Plan Manitou is still in operation. And that then when we get to the discussing the residential, that would be a good place to put it in. So I think that's, but I would want that language that Alan suggested there. I did want to ask about the more on, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would specifically like to have adjacency, and I don't know what the language would be. I defer to the professionals at the end of the table here, but adjacency includes roads, easements, whatever.
Okay, I think we sort of, what are the, as we go through these things, we can sort of take a test of what others think about this.
Well, I guess I'm confused about the process. Are we, I mean, sooner or later, you gotta send this out to council. I get it, but are we making recommendations? Are we making demands? Are we making motions? What are we doing?
What I think would be appropriate is we go through these issues. If someone brings something up, like, I think height should be 50 feet. I don't like 35. We'll take a test of the whole, sample the board and document what the majority.
But if we make changes, does that delay the presentation to city council?
No.
Or we're just making recommendations?
We're making a recommendation. Our recommendation will go on to council. They're reviewing the same document, but they will see our recommendations for change. Like if we decide we want to change the dimensional standards for HDR or multi-use this or that, or we want to add this language, that's going to be our recommendation. We're pushing it forward, but these 1, 2 through 10 items we're changing. So we could, as we're going, we could just, we can write them down as we go, but as we're going through, if we just sort of test the water, see how everybody feels. I got a sense that David and Tip both are wanting to include right of ways and easements and so on. So.
You want to start chapter 1?
Pardon?
Do you want to start at chapter 1? Is there any, we've got to have a process to move us through.
Yeah, well, if Tip, I don't know, we have to go in chapter by chapter order, but we, if you feel that would be better, we could back up and do it that way. I was just thinking that, we take our turn, we speak about our concerns or support, and then sort of discuss what comes up and then go to the next topic. And so
Should I just continue with my other one, or should we go around?
yeah, well, yeah, why don't you just, we'll get disorganized otherwise. Let's let Tip go through his items and
The other issue is the one that we were discussing earlier, that I still think it would be really good for the planning commission to have guidance about that second required criteria. And I expressed why I was a little bit concerned about it. Not that I could imagine that would be the way to go. And I appreciate the city council putting it in, but I think it would be good for the city council or for someone to give us guidance about, do we enforce that really or not? Again, because the way it's stipulated, up until now, we might very well have decided to grant a variance, but the way it's being presented here, it appears to me that we're being told you would not grant a variance. Maybe we want to do that, but it adds inflexibility, and I'd kind of like to know if that's the intent.
could we put up the variance criteria on the screen so we could all see it?
Yes, Jen's gonna pull that up.
What would be the next opportunity, public input? At the end or 5 minutes?
Pardon?
When would be the next opportunity for public?
At city council? There won't be. We close the public comment period. Yes. Oh, is that-
You all see that okay?
Yes.
Is it possible to blow that up a little bit, or are we? Yeah.
Is that better, Alice?
So from what we talked about earlier, this has already been rewritten in light of what city council has said.
No,
Uh,
so, oh, go ahead, Hannah.
That was the recommendation out of the work session, was to move that particular one into the required. So that hasn't happened yet, but it was a comment that came out of that meeting.
So it's hard to figure out exactly how we recommend if there's not a concrete proposal now, right?
So as it's currently shown is what city council reviewed. So their proposal or their idea was that we move that second criteria up to from the optional section to the required section. So they wanted planning commission to consider that change.
Yeah, I have to agree with Tip that that other criteria will make it really hard to approve any. So, and again, we're making a recommendation to council. And we can, you know, if that's the sense of what we want, to leave it as it is here, then that's our choice. We don't have to adhere to what one person on council suggested.
So in that case, I would prefer to leave it as written here, stipulated here, because that's exactly right. You know much better, but the council can do whatever they want afterwards. But we should have the flexibility to look at the whole package and make otherwise we're gonna just have to deny everything that comes in front of us.
Yeah, and yeah, I think we definitely, this is what we're here for. Is we have the experience of twisting ourselves into pretzels month after month, trying to rationalize variances. And the whole idea was to make something that would work. And, you know, I'm perfectly supportive of leaving the mandatory two as they are. What I would suggest, since we're talking about variances, I'll throw in what my input would be of the second part where it says you need to meet 5 of the following. One of them, number 5, the existence of non-conforming structures shall not be considered grounds for the issuance of a variance. That's not something you meet. That's a declarative statement. So I would probably suggest taking that out and not having that be one of the choices. And so that would leave 6, six criteria which you need to meet. Here it says 5. I would suggest reducing it to 3 or maybe 4. I think 3 would, just looking at it. And I tried to think about different times we've had variances, and I think meeting 4 out of the 6 might be challenging, but I think 3 out of the 6 could meet most cases, like unnecessary hardship, no design alternatives, enforcement deprives deprives applicant of rights enjoyed by majority of neighbors. So, I think picking 3 out of 6 might be the right number, or 4. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? David?
Well, I don't want to make this more complicated than it already is, but there's always a design alternative. Tear it down, start over. Now, that might be cost prohibitive, but at any rate, I'm certainly in favor of providing some flexibility. And I think I heard you correctly, Hannah. Right now, we would be in the position, if we approved this or voiced our approval of this, that you would have to go to city council and recommend something that you said is impossible. So I don't think we want to put you in that position.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the greater flexibility. I would be good with keeping that second provision that, as it was going to be moved up back in this list. I think that going with a 3 rather than the 4 also makes some sense. I just wonder if it could be coupled that if somebody claims that they are making the 3, that it doesn't, is there a way to, maybe this would be for the lawyer actually to talk about, like, I wonder if there could be flexibility that maybe the 3 makes sense, but actually it's just a terrible idea or whatever. And maybe in the judgment and the history and all of that of the people up here, they might say, it just doesn't, it's not a good way to go. I don't know if there could be flexibility on both ways, but I don't know if that is possible.
So you could have a limiting criteria and you basically say at the end of this, but in no case shall approval of a variance result in, and then you can list what you definitely do not want a variance to end up in, and have that limiting criteria. So it's basically, even if you meet the criteria above, you still could not qualify for a variance if this is the result of approval.
So when we do at my college and we work on the faculty handbook, we oftentimes use a phrase something like necessary but not sufficient or something like that to get to the issue that you're talking about. So I wonder if we could have some kind of language to that in that regard, that, everything going well, if you have 3, yes, we have it in our purview to grant it, but it doesn't force us to do it. You have to meet it, but it doesn't like the necessary, but it's not sufficient.
It would have to be sufficiently definite what you mean so that you didn't apply it like on a ad hoc basis. So you would have to say what that limiting criteria is. For instance, like a degradation in environmental character or degradation in neighborhood character. If that was the result of the variance being approved, then it won't be approved essentially. So it would get you out rather than in.
It sounds like it could get messy if it sounds like it could almost get a little subjective. I'd rather have some discrete thing, like, if we want to say 4 out of 6. But
maybe so, if you want to be sure. I think it gets to the issue that Mike Casey was raising about having the flexibility for the vacation rentals by owners too. And so how much do we want to be bound by the stipulated criteria, and how much do we want to have some flexibility? But if it's unwise to do that in this particular case, then I think I would go for the 4.
Other thoughts on 4? Does 4 sound reasonable?
I support that.
Okay, so keep the 2 mandatory and then 4 out of the 6, getting rid of the one that's not really a criteria. Yes, that's what I mean. Keep the 2 mandatories as proposed here, as we suggested. And I think this discussion is to be observed by council, and they'll understand why we came up with this. So, David?
I'm a little slow here. I didn't understand why 4 is better than 3. I think 3 means more flexibility to me. Am I missing something?
I think that the difference is it gives flexibility to the person who's applying for the variance, but I don't think that that's the same thing as the planning commission having flexibility in making the decision.
Okay. So do you have, you've talked about adjacencies and variance criteria. Are there any other things you want to bring up now? Okay. Mike, do you want to go?
Yes. Couple things. I thought there was some interesting points brought up by the public this evening. I think we should, I know it was proven, it was documented about all the hours that went into this prior to here, and it went round and round and round, and a lot of thought and effort went into it, research and subcommittees ad nauseum. I'm not, so I think as far as the numbers are concerned, I think as far as lot density and the height and so forth are, I mean, we just got to trust our teammates, I guess, on that one. But one comment that I thought was valuable, we removed the parking requirements for land in the downtown zone, which was great. In the comment to remove the minimum parking in the general residential areas, I think is valid too. I mean, why is there a need for a minimum? So I just thought that was a good point. Anybody have thoughts on that?
Yeah, that scares me. I am of the belief that people are still going to have cars for the next 20 years. I don't think we're going to eliminate them. And this is a case where, as ugly as it is, I'd rather consider variances if people can't meet a parking requirement. That's sort of my thinking on that. I mean, it took me a while to get around to accepting like the no minimum in the downtown for business, but it makes sense. And maybe someday it will make sense if we do really have that redevelopment. But I just worry about some of our general residential areas, especially, not necessarily in the downtown and the historic, but other areas, they're pretty constrained now. The streets aren't that wide. And if we allow people to have no requirement, we'll just have that many more cars on the street. And we talked about, I think one of the changes that was proposed was to reduce the minimum residential requirement for general residential lots that don't meet the minimum lot size. There are a lot of substandard lots, and they would only have to provide one. So that's sort of my thinking on it. Other thoughts on that?
I support that.
Agree with you.
Yeah, I agree with you also.
Well, I think both comments are valid, and yeah, you make a strong case, so.
And okay, then, so somebody could ask for variance and power on. And then the definition of the household with I apologize, I didn't bring my iPad, but the 5 maximum unrelated people, I believe. Is that what we want to see? Is that worthy of discussion?
No, we don't want that.
Oh, you turn you're off.
I think Ms. Day stated it quite eloquently. That's irrelevant to what we do as a planning commission or as a city.
I agree with that.
So what do you recommend?
Just delete that,
The quantity? Or
that definition of a household. The unrelated persons part. I don't know exactly what the language is, but
I can read it. Household means one person or two or more persons who are related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship, domestic partnership, or other duly authorized custodial relationship as verified by public records such as driver's license, birth or marriage certificates, or a group not in excess of 5 persons living together as a single household unit. For the purposes of this definition, an individual employed by the household who resides in the dwelling unit whose live-in status is required by the nature of their employment shall be considered a member of the household.
Tip.
So I'm someone who usually brings these kinds of considerations under investigation here as a member of the LGBTQ community myself, who knows well the history of discrimination against us. I would be very reticent to do something that could lead to forms of discrimination. That said, and I stand by that, I have a colleague right now who's he has a book coming out on the history of squats in Central Europe in the 20th century, the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. When it comes out, you guys should all read it. It's a great book. I would be reluctant to have, for example, in the house next to me, to have it be permitted that 25 people could live there. No matter how many are in each bedroom or whatever. I just think that there's an interest for the community to prevent that from happening. That's not a comment about their particular relationships. I just think that it's not it's not good for the whole community. So if we change the definition of the household and all that, I think there has to be some kind of consideration about how many people could live in a unit.
And if I can just add in, it's a more modern approach, I'd say, to get rid of almost all of that and say that a household shall consist of X number of individuals or less.
Oh, there you go.
And do you have any knowledge of what other communities are using for that number?
It's highly contentious. Denver has 2 city council members removed after moving it up from 6 to 8. So just depends on the community, but it's always highly, highly contentious. But I agree, all of that language is problematic.
You could have a family larger than 8.
I think a family is permitted. It's in the case where you have unrelated people living together.
Yeah, but we were eliminating that. We were talking about eliminating that and just using a number.
Okay. Yeah, I think that
So right now the number's 5.
well, I live next to Tip Reagan. I'm wondering how many people he would accept, though. It's not entirely relevant, but.
I mean, it's not in I think 5 is fine. I think 8's fine. Again, I wouldn't want 30 living there.
Yeah, and that's that's the challenge. And, you know, I guess I'm of the opinion to leave the family part in there to cover big families, because there are going to be some big houses with big families. But I'm uncomfortable with opening it up and saying 12 unrelated people. I think that's a bit more than is what the community will accept. I was happy with 5. I'd be comfortable with 6. I'm a little uncomfortable going much beyond that.
Do you want to, but to the lady who spoke earlier, if it's a 7-bedroom house, is 6 limiting? Do you want to tie it into the size, square footage, or bedroom, number of bedrooms? That would make sense. Because that's what you're trying to avoid, is a squatting situation where you've got a 1-bedroom house and 6 people living in it. So if it's no more than 2 people per permitted bedroom.
Just out of curiosity, what is the 12 tribes situation?
I have no idea.
I think it's something that may be violating our existing code and hasn't been addressed.
Could from the legal standpoint, would it be possible to have language that there would have to be no more than 2 per bedroom?
Yep, you could define a household by those metrics, and other communities do. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I have to.
I kind of like that idea.
Okay, one of the things in the definition is, I think it's in our definition, that it talks about when these unrelated people live together, they live as a household. So it's not like I have my 8-bedroom house and I rent out rooms to individuals who sort of have nothing to do with the household. They're just renting a room. So is that okay to have that living as a household, or do we want to?
You're right, because it was a single household, dual household. It's back in definitions.
Need to read it again.
We're required to have a definition of household, otherwise we leave ourselves wide open to bad situations.
Yeah, okay, so the language I like, whether it's 5 or X or whatever, it's like 5 persons living together as a single household keeping unit. I think that's the language that makes better sense to me.
So some communities have gotten rid of it altogether. Fort Collins is an example. So they would have no way to enforce whether you have 3 people in a house or 40 people in a house, no matter the square footage or what have you. And so they would rely on their nuisance provisions, which is actually more modern now. So it's basically you can have as many people you can fit in the house as you like. And when it becomes an issue, we will enforce through our nuisance provisions.
That sounds like a recommendation.
Nope, just throwing it out there. Sorry, I don't mean to persuade one way or the other.
I don't mean to push you into a corner.
It would be instructive to come with me to the neighborhood around Colorado College where I work and talk to neighbors about the houses that have large numbers of students living in them. And there are noise and whatever provisions there too, but there are oftentimes incredible challenges.
Of course, in this situation, the household definition is really just tying back into single family household. And when we're talking about adding this extra definition, we're actually trying to create a different code issue by saying no more than 2 people in a bedroom. It really doesn't have anything to do with the household thing. I think we're trying to solve a problem that's not actually really there.
It's your fault, Carrie.
I'm sorry, I started it, but when you think about it, when the definition of household, we're creating a separate enforceable, we're not going to have big groups of people, more than 2 people in a bedroom, which has nothing actually to do with the term household in the way it's used in the code.
So I think it ties into single family dwelling units, if I'm correct. So
Yeah.
that would be characterized as a household. So if that single family dwelling unit had more than 5 unrelated persons, then it would be in violation of the zoning code and you can enforce that.
And that,
I'm not sure if I answered the question. at
yeah,
all.
but then, okay, so did you want to then, in that situation, you could use the no more than 2 people per bedroom?
Exactly right.
Okay. Let's do that.
Okay, what is, you're suggesting a household is no more than 2 people per bedroom, period.
The household, we just say is no more than five unrelated people, or what, how did you say it? Or 'cause you brought it, you had a little more clarity to it.
And I want to be cautious not to go in the domain of policy making. So,
Right.
so I'm sorry, what is the legal question?
All right. So, all right. There's not a legal question. So how are we going to define household? We're going to. Okay. It was 5 people per.
I'll speak so we can get on record.
We're trying to clarify.
Yeah. Okay. It currently says 5 persons living together as a single housekeeping unit. Or family related by blood, etc., adoption.
We can delete all that. We can say 5 people per dwelling unit, right? Because we don't care about how they're related by adoption, as long as they don't exceed the 2 people per bedroom.
I don't know. To me, there might be somewhat of a difference if you have 2 people and they have 8 children. And that to me makes sense to have them be able to live there. I guess that, and I think that's fine. Maybe what we could do is split the difference and continue to say, because the definition's pretty broad. I mean, there's adoption and certificates and whatever, so people can have large families in the household. The question about unrelated, maybe we should just go to what Denver said and say 8. Either people related in what are these ways, or if 8 is okay for Denver, I don't see going more than that here in Manitou Springs.
Or we can make a recommendation to council that we have a concern with the household definition. Be done with it. I mean, not to kick the can down the road, but we could debate this all day long. And
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure the committee in their 500 hours seriously have thought long and hard about this. And there's the history behind the result that we just don't know.
Yeah, actually, I can give you that history. We probably spent at least a couple meetings beating this around. And I probably spent a full day going through and reading the zoning code for every community I could find up and down the Front Range. And they pretty much hovered around this. Some of them were more restrictive. I don't remember any, maybe Denver was 6 when I read it, but I'm comfortable keeping the definition if we want to change the 5 to a different number as a proposal to council, or if we'd rather just pass it on to council and say, we're not sure on this one.
Well, I don't want to speak for other people, but I think the gist was all or nothing. Why do we need it? Or if we do need it, then let's keep what we have. But I think the concern was why.
Well, why we need
No,
it.
I'm not asking you for an answer. I'm just saying that right. It appeared to me, it was like, why do we need this at all? But not so much the quantity, but why periods. But I mean, I get it, the squatting thing, that there's a lot of history, a lot of discussion and so forth. So I don't know if it's the issue is, do we go from 5 to 6? It was more of, why do we need it at all?
Well, I think, it did come up in a neighborhood. I wish Darlene was still here because she encountered this in her, cul-de-sac where absentee landlord across the street decided, oh, I'm going to turn this into a boarding house. And her argument was, well, it's a single family neighborhood or single household. And is that fair to have a boarding house? Just come in there. And that's where
I get it.
where we started really working on it. So I'm comfortable leaving it the way it is, changing the number or saying punting to council. I'd prefer not to punt to council, but if that's the best we can do, okay. David?
Well, council's going to do what they want to do, and I don't know how, well, council's going to do what they want to do. I would like to say that we recognize that this was debated by both the professionals we've hired to advise us and the advisory committee. And there was a considerable amount of discussion tonight about the best way to approach this. And I would like to note that I don't know, the language is some of the more modern approaches to this are less restrictive and just mentioned Denver said 8.
And that's what you want to say to council
Yeah.
or say for our recommendation. What do others think of that? No? Carrie scowling.
Well, I'm scowling. Well, I'm just thinking, so if it's a 1-bedroom apartment, we're saying we could define that as 8. I don't know that we'd want 8 people in a 800 square foot apartment.
Well, as is pointed out, there are nuisance, there are other limiting ordinances. So.
Yeah, there are housing rules that talk about occupancy, I think.
It's related. We've talked a lot about this in the context of the VRBOs. There have been many times where we've restricted how many people could be per bedroom or whatever. And so to me, it's a related issue that if we really just decided not to have any, I would be opposed to that. But if we decided not to have any restrictions at all, then I think we have to get rid of them for the VRBOs too, because I don't know why you would be more restrictive there. But but I think there should be some kind of I think there's a way to have a reasonable number.
I'll just say on reflection, I think I'd stand with what the committee recommends.
I would too.
I wonder if, since we're just passing on to the city council, if we couldn't just say that we're concerned that the ordinance could be used as a discriminatory weapon.
Yeah, well, we could leave it as is and with our recommendation, we can have some findings, and what you just said will be one of those findings. How does that sound?
And I would just note that Gloria has her hand up.
Can y'all hear me? Yeah, I have a bit of a sore throat, but whatever we put in this area is going to be an arbitrary number. Somebody could put 2 bunk beds in a bedroom and you have 4, which might be reasonable. So I would concur with the consensus that let's leave out the language that is could be used as discriminatory and just put a number in there. I'm fine with 5, or I'm fine also with a certain number per bedroom. But we won't come up with a perfect number that's going to work for us long term.
Let me just add one other thing. The size of the house is also related to this. A bigger house can accommodate more people.
Yes.
But just so we're on the same page, it's 5 people unrelated. It's not babies and families, and twins. That's the goal, is to try to, differentiate between a large family and a bunch of people that are boarding house.
Just out of curiosity, is that 4 people in a family? 4 unrelated people in a family?
the way it reads now, it's a family, and think of blood, adoption, domestic partners, foster children. Some kind of duly authorized custodial relationship is what it says. So that could be any number, I would think, as long as occupancy would allow it. Or the alternative is 5 persons living together as a single housekeeping unit.
Oh, so it's not and or, it's just or.
Yeah, exactly. And when we debated this, there was then the thing, well, what if you have 2 couples and then they have kids? And I sort of felt like, I think I came down on the side of 5 adults, and children, come with adults if they have them. So, but then it gets sticky, but that's, I think we have a good sort of starting place. If we want to tweak the 5 number, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think definitionally it covers, or it's a broad definition of a family unit, or what could be legally described as a family unit, because of all the different legal relationships that are in that definition: family, domestic partners, guardianship, foster, custodial care. So I think the broad legal definition should cover most people and not restrict the numbers. And then the non-legally related people, I agree. I think we can come up with some number that's arbitrary, to Gloria's point. It can be 6, it can be 8, whatever, but it needs to be restricted because of the comments that we've already shared around the table. So I think definitionally, the way it's written, describing a family or a legal group of people cohabitating works. And then the rest of it is just a matter of coming up with a number that feels right. I think we have to move away from 2 people in a bedroom or this many bathrooms or whatever. I don't like that.
Yeah. How about we just say 6 and move on? Is that okay? Okay, who was taught, it was still Mike, okay.
Okay, hopefully nothing longer than what I just brought up. Just to be clear, so everyone knows that I think it was in the variance section 1806.4.2-ish, there's a line in there that says that the planning commission is not bound by precedences, which I don't know if that's a new line or old. It doesn't make a difference, but I remember that was contentious in many meetings about us setting precedences. So now it's in writing that we're not, and that's great. Another comment that was made this evening about experimental zoning or something, I have no idea what that means, but it sounds intriguing. I don't know if we need to address that now, but I would like to learn more about it down the road. Codes can always be changed and updated and modified. So in the ombudsman, I remember that word somewhere, but I'd like to learn more about that. And then back to short-term rentals. Again, we just can't have this checklist. We in a nutshell, it was out of control. We had a moratorium. We legislated ourselves into a corner, and now we have a chance to change it. As simple as something is the sole discretion of the planning commission, or we have to have some sort of flexibility in the code where we can look at each applicant and make a decision. In other words, the checklist is a guideline, maybe, but we as a team have to have some sort of way to have some flexibility because, that having one code for something as sensitive as this for the entire city of Manitou is hard. That's why we have to look at it at a case by case basis and have to be able to make some sort of decision. I don't know how to do that, on the heat of the moment here, but I've brought it up many, many times and no one's disagreed with me. So
So are we discussing this as a topic then? So I guess here's my perspective on that. I would agree. I like the idea of flexibility. I think we were all seated here at that meeting where we had, 60 community members in here going, holy cow, we really, 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 really don't want this. And being able as a commission to say, what, we're going to take into account somehow the community feeling on this one. But on the opposite side, I don't know if saying that we'll grant a vacation rental in a neighborhood where somebody's moved in and looked and said, okay, I know there's a vacation rental here before I buy my house, and the other one is down there. I know I'm not going to have to deal with any more vacation rentals. And then somebody within that 500-foot radius comes before us, a commission, and is granted that outside of the guidelines. So I wouldn't agree to that. I would agree to saying we have flexibility and it's not a checklist for approval of a new one, but I not if it's not doesn't meet the criteria. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess, I would love to have criteria that we could judge it. It just seems like every time the only thing we can come up with is the neighborhood doesn't want it. And that's the challenge. I don't see how we can implement that. I can't, it's like, I think we've probably denied 2 in the last 10 years. And it was, one was because they didn't have parking, as I remember. And one, I guess, there was one.
Well,
Yeah.
I respectfully going to argue that because if somebody, I couldn't give you a perfect example, but it doesn't make a difference. But if somebody goes to the planning department and the checklist, if they don't meet the criteria for the checklist, we never see it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is go back to the 400-foot example. And so if somebody wants to plead their case, they're denied at the front door, so if somebody has a 400-foot distance, I think they should be able to have a variance for that would otherwise would deny them.
Well, so that would be a variance request, which if I understand, we already have that. Would that cover something like this?
A variance request would cover anything that was outside of what code stated. So if it was one of the separation distance, they wanted to do something less, or if it was one of the other criteria, like you don't have enough parking spaces or something along those lines, then they would have to get a variance for that. And then we would adhere that request to the variance criteria versus the short-term rental criteria.
Okay, so as an example, somebody that doesn't know all the rules comes in and goes to City Hall and asks to apply for a rental, and they go on the map, whoever they are, they go on the map and say, nope, you're inside the circle. Denied. That's how it happens, I'm sure, right?
Yes, they would have, so we would deny their short-term rental application, but they could apply for a short-term rental application and a variance, and then both the package is raised up to the City Planning Commission for consideration. Or another option is we deny it and then they appeal our decision. And then you're looking at the appeal criteria versus a short-term rental criteria.
Okay, well, that's refreshing, honestly. but I don't think your average person is going to know that. Maybe that should be on the application. I don't know.
Right. It's the same with all applications where, I mean, that's kind of the problem with, one of the problems with the existing code is you kind of need a planning degree to understand where information is, or a law degree, or, to be familiar with the field. And the new version is much more simple to understand and follow, where a regular person could open the code and understand what the requirements are. And it is our professional duty to make sure that we're communicating everything within a person's arsenal, so to speak. So just because we may not like something, it would be unethical for us to not communicate that they have the ability to go down a certain path.
And, just
You
for the
guys hear me?
record, we did have one appeal about a year after we implemented the code. And it was for a property that was like within 10 feet of the 500 feet. And we had ended up allowing it.
Appealed to council?
Yeah, to commission. David Corpenning did it. He had a place right on Ruxton. And it was like 6 feet or 4 feet or something outside the permissible.
Okay. All right. I'm done with just some minor things. On the definitions, after every word, it says means. I mean, I think you could just eliminate 700 means. Because by definition, well, enough said. You might want to consider adding the definition of a cool roof. You have in the code, it states that clear as can be, density means the number of dwelling units allowed per each gross acre of land, but I don't think that's in the definitions. So you might want to just put the definition of density, the definition of dwelling units. Again, I apologize, I don't have it here. And then the definition of dwelling units per acre, I think would be another good one to add. And that's all my comments. Oh, I'm sorry. Just so you know, all the links don't work. I don't know if you knew that, but a lot of the links don't work on the software right now.
Can you guys hear me?
We're getting through this.
We do have a hand raised by Justin. I don't know
Oh,
if he
Justin.
had a comment
Okay.
on one of these
Sorry,
things.
Justin.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I wanted to back up to the short-term rental thing. I was wondering if maybe we could build in discretion, if that's what we're looking for, by in addition to the criteria we already have, kind of pull down the two criterion that are in the purpose and intent statement, the one about not adversely impacting surrounding uses and does not encroach upon traditional neighborhood character. I think we've referenced those before in past meetings, but frankly, with them being in the purpose intent section, there's not a lot of teeth behind it. And if they were maybe pending legal objection, if they were incorporated into the conditions and standards section, they might be enforceable and also give us some flexibility to evaluate each packet on a case-by-case basis.
Sounds good.
No. Can one of you over there in that corner say something?
No legal issue from my perspective.
Oh, well.
If that's the direction that the planning commission would want to go down, we can definitely make that change.
All rise.
Okay. Anybody in any opposed? Okay, then let's try that. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah. Score. Yes.
Hey, who would like to go next? We're getting through this.
I'll go. I think all my issues I've raised and they've been clarified and discussed.
Okay. David?
I'd just like to say that I feel a little bit awkward after Jen's work Hannah's work and certainly the advisory committee to be debating these things. On the other hand, that was the intent. And I appreciate Jen and Hannah's understanding in particular. So it was well intentioned. Our actions tonight, I think, are well intentioned.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a couple. No, I didn't spend 500 hours reading this thing, but I'm sure I spent over 100. And I go back mostly to the dimensional standards. I'm uncomfortable. I don't buy that we have to go to 35 feet in the HDR. I think in the end, if we keep it at 35, we'll probably reduce the number of rezonings to HDR because it'll be more impactful. You know, just the experience we have from the one we did on Becker's, it was maybe part of it was we could have pushed for a better design that pushed it back, but I'd lobby to keep the max building height in the HDR at 30 feet as it was for the last 7 years or whatever. I think it's worked. And I don't buy the contention that you can't have 3 stories in 30 feet. So that's just the first thing I'll throw out there for thoughts.
Well, I mean, Dave, what do you think? I mean, your typical new build is going to have a 9-foot ceiling, and then you got the gap in between floors, and then the roof material and so forth. So I'm sure that was a motivating factor. It was discussed. So you can't. It forces you not to have 4 levels, but it gives you the flexibility to have higher ceilings.
Yeah, which is exactly what Hannah said earlier.
Right.
And as an architect, I agree.
Well, you know, the 2 examples of new builds that were HDR, they were able to do fairly successful projects with the 30-foot limit. And I believe in one case, they actually got a variance of 1.5 feet for part of it. But so that's my thinking that.
I don't think you gain anything by limiting it to 30. I don't think the city gains anything by limiting it to 30.
Well, I think impact on existing neighborhoods is where the gain might be, I guess is what I think. That by raising it up, we get a lot more 9 and 10-foot ceilings. And I don't subscribe to the notion that you have to have 9 or 10-foot ceilings to have livable space.
Is it Gloria? She has her hand up. But...
Oh, I don't have a comment on that particular issue. I was going to make some general comments when we're concluding.
Connie, what did you?
I tend to agree with you, Alan. I guess I'm more of an advocate for keeping things low because it seems like you know, it just continues to creep higher and higher and higher. And I think one of the things that's great about our community is that we don't look like downtown Colorado Springs. And I personally don't want us to look like that. So, but I'm no expert. I mean, I would defer to the group at this point. I just think that's more of a sort of an emotional perspective or I guess uneducated perspective, but I just think lower is better, especially if we want to preserve just some of the visual line of sight beauty of our community. So that's just my opinion.
Well, I think that without sitting in those meetings, I'm sure that the goal was to allow 3-story houses and try to prevent, for lack of a better term, 4 stories. So I'm sure there was a lot of thought behind that 35-foot number, so I'm fine with it.
I think a good design is lower sometimes and a bit higher sometimes.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying too, David. And I see the logic and the artistry of it. I guess that in the end, I've been someone from the day one that has been talking about how Manitou's character is to have things on a more human scale. One of the things that the committee did was they went much higher than I had thought we were moving in the direction for the eastern part of the Manitou Avenue. I was a little surprised about that. I appreciate Mike reminding us that a lot of time has gone into it, and I didn't raise it, even though I never was supportive of that. But now that Alan has raised this, I would probably, I don't have super strong feelings about it, given what our colleague here and friend has said, but I'm a little bit more in line with what you're saying, that to me, one of the big objectives was to keep the character of Manitou, and to me, that is about a less massing and less scale.
But what we're talking about is high density residential builds, right? Which for us, help me remember where our high density residential areas are.
We have
we
two
have-
new builds that are high density residential. They're
over
just properties.
Beckers.
The Beckers Lane property, where the Beckers Lane Lodge had been, and the other one are those townhouses that are across from Fields Park. There's sort of grayish ones that have the different.
So those are the only one, where are we zoned high density
We
residential?
aren't.
So it's only if we do a change and rezone an area to high density residential that this is going to come into play.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I guess yeah. I'll just read my favorite part of the code. And this is in general provisions purpose. Development within all zone districts shall be designed to preserve open space and promote a layout that is sensitive to scale, identity, and natural land features, including but not limited to preservation of natural landforms, view corridors, historic sites, wildlife corridors, community trails, multiple modes of transit, and neighborhood connectivity in accordance with the intent of the Manitou Springs Open Space Plan, the historic district design guidelines, and the comprehensive plan. And I feel like if we go bigger and denser and taller, we're going to lose the character of Manitou. And that's why I'm trying to slow down on some of this stuff. And I drive down, I go out, I have a doctor that's out at International Circle, and I go down the Fountain, and I go over on Wasatch, South Wasatch, and they're just big hulking monsters there. And that's what I would prefer not to see here. I think we can have affordable, I think we can have higher density without hulking things up. And some of it is dependent on making other trade-offs, like maybe you have 9-foot ceilings on one floor, but not on the others. Or maybe my house, I have some vaulted ceilings in part, and most of it is 7.5 feet. I haven't suffered in years, and it's not all old build, it's new build, but we didn't choose to massify the property. So anyway, that's where I am on it. But so I can't, we're sort of split. It sounds like there's Connie, me, maybe Tim would like to keep it lower. And
I think that I would move towards your 30 feet, because now I understand if we don't have anything designated this right now. So it's going to be something we're going to designate in the future as high density. So we're not taking it away. We're not taking the height away from anybody who's got a property under development or is designated as high density, that we're changing it. So I'd support the 30.
Everybody else, Gloria, Justin, what do you think?
I'm okay with the 30. I know that from an architectural point of view, builders would like to go up rather than out for financial reasons, and also just for if they're new builds, that tends to be is what buyers want, is higher ceilings. I think, like you say, you can probably, as Carrie pointed out, we already have both of those buildings in the high density residential, and there's very little other space. Actually, I don't think there's any. So I don't know that it's going to be an issue in the future unless somebody buys the Red Wing Hotel and wants to put something else in there.
Well, just it's sort of personal, Gloria, but since you live in one of those HDR units that's only 30 feet high, is it livable or comfortable? Do you like it?
I think it's Ashley is 32, Alan. I think there was a variance on some of the height on a like a design. There's some extra brick on the top. Yes, it's we have a 10 foot, 9 foot ceiling, and then two 10-foot ceilings. So yes, and I'm 5'2", so it's quite easy for me.
Okay, so maybe thanks. Justin, did you have thoughts?
I'm fine with the 30. I could honestly go either way, but I do appreciate your perspective on it and what others have said tonight. So I'm fine with 30 as well.
David?
I gotta say that I'm a little bit confused and dismayed about the direction of this specific conversation. First of all, 30 or 35 feet has nothing to do with the large apartment blocks that are being built in downtown Colorado Springs. I mean, 35 feet is not going to allow a 5 or 6 story building. And I don't think it's hard for me to imagine how any developer could assemble a large enough block to build one of those massive apartment blocks. 5 feet compared to additional 5 feet compared to 30 feet is a 16% difference. And it is only an optional thing. And I would go back to what I said earlier. Good design is in one instance would be 30 feet. In another instance, it'd be 31.2 feet. In a third instance, it'd be 35 feet. And then I finally would say what has been already stated several times, and this included you, Alan, the advisory committee, and our professional consultants, after a lot of deliberation, came up with 35 feet. I would be very reluctant to change that at this point.
Just for clarification, it was not unanimous on every decision that the committee made. We did consensus, and there was a lot of discussion on this, and it was not unanimous. So anyway, the way I'm sensing it, we're kind of split, maybe 5 to 4 or something. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, that's our message. We're split. So, I mean, it's all end of story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we don't need a number, right? We don't
Yeah.
have to vote.
Well, we do sort of need to, say these are definitive, and I think we got pretty close on the household and short-term rentals. We pretty much were unanimous on that. Anyway, I'll move on. The next item I had was, again, I just sort of look at the changes from our existing, and in the multi-use commercial, AKA the URA, there's a proposal to increase density from 15 to 25. And the argument is always, oh, we need workforce housing, we need affordable housing. And I would suggest that we tie any increase in density to some sort of formula of how much deed restricted workforce housing or affordable housing or whatever you want to call it, 100% of AMI. And that's what triggers higher densities. Because, you know, my experience in the time I've been on this commission is people aren't building smaller, they're building bigger. They're maxing out. And I would rather put some controls on that. So I would suggest tying the increase from 15. Yeah, I mean, maybe, you know, I'd be comfortable capping, you know, having the allowed density in the multi-use at 20, which is what we're proposing for commercial. Because, and there, you know, the existing commercial like outside of downtown, and anything above 20, have it tied to deed restricted housing. Like you get a 25% increase if you provide 25% deed restricted. Is that okay? Good. Let's see. What's the other one? Well, okay. This is the one that I think, you know, I sort of almost have PTSD from that joint meeting with council where we talked about height. And I think there was a unanimity that we didn't want to have more things like the hotel that was built. And so I'm comfortable leaving the height at 35, like is proposed, you know, proposed without the extra 4 feet on the south side. I get worried about it. And you know, I think even 35, you know, like that's that gives a lot of room. But you know, Carrie.
What group are you talking about for when you're speaking to right now?
What do you mean?
Is it high density residential? Or no?
The multi-use, the URA, sorry. Yeah. The URA has somewhere some language about moving the, you know, if you go to if you're on the south side, you get an extra 4 feet, and then you get your 5 feet of equipment or air conditioning, solar, and so on. It's going to make it pretty big. So I'm comfortable leaving it there, but the bigger piece of it, and this is where, you know, I think the early presentation talked about something like a height envelope. And, you know, if you think about how we do height in residential, we do it highest and lowest average if you're on a slope. And that works fairly well in our residential zones. But you take the example of the hotel that was built, and it was using the old paradigm, which was measure from the street. You get 35 feet and you get an extra 5 feet if it's broken up on the height. But on the slope lot, like if you walk around the perimeter of the Holiday Inn now, and it's, you know, it's all built, you can walk in their parking lot and you're not really trespassing, I guess. But if you walk to the back and you look up, it's 50 feet just because of the slope, or close to 50 feet. So the Holiday Inn is pretty big hulk, and they did everything by the code. So we can't fault them following the code, but that's what we want to fix. And on the north side of Manitou, like the Holiday Inn, you don't see that 50 feet. Now, if you go over to the other side, the south side, like where the La Fun is, or El Colorado, or the race car museum, you have the opposite effect. You'd have, if you did that calculation, the lowest elevation and the highest and average them, you could have a big 50-foot high oak in front. And that's why I think we need to have some kind of a height envelope that caps it at the permissible height. Am I making sense at all, Mike? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So, oh, the picture's up there, so of what I'm sort of.
What's your suggestion?
My suggestion is to require, and I don't know, Hannah, do you have any way to articulate that?
What we would be adding is some additional language in how we measure building height to include a envelope that we could describe and define that follows the existing and natural topography, so that you're more working with the slope rather than using it to average out one side, which may end up much higher than another.
What do you think? Architect, what do you think? David? Okay, well, you're in favor, okay. Okay, I just think it's a way to keep us from, you know, it's like, if it's allowed, it's potential to happen. And I just think it could be pretty gruesome on a slope like that. And maybe the same kind of dynamic would happen on the west end if that ever gets developed. You know, there is commercial there, you know, you'll be going up. So you could, if we don't have that thing, you know, if we have our traditional average slope, we could get average height, we could get some really weird things.
I'm very in favor of that. I had actually raised, based on past experiences, some problems that had resulted from the way we started defining that. So I really like that idea.
Yeah. Okay,
I'll support it.
okay, Mike. Justin, Gloria.
Okay.
Support it.
Okay. Okay, I think I have one last thing. And this has, you know, something that changed in our code, and it's a matter, it's with uses, and it may have, you know, since I spent 100 hours reading this, I saw all this stuff, but one thing that never was a permitted use in residential zones was group homes, small group homes, up to 8 people. And that is now permitted. And it's actually not permitted, it's required by law. The state law has changed where it is required. So what I would like to see, you know, right now, if you look at for example, the parking table, well, the use table, there are no use requirements for that use. And I feel like if you have a small group home in a residential neighborhood, there should at least be some expectations on parking. You know, if I don't know if we could put up, there's a, let's see, page 104 in the land use code. It shows, you know, there's like about 8 different type categories of group homes that can be.
Here I have it.
A group home is small, the next one down. And so some of those uses, some of those situations, you could require quite a few support personnel, like sociology, you know, social workers, nurses. So I just think some simple language saying that support personnel or there will be adequate parking for these small group homes would be important. Otherwise, I fear that they'll show up somewhere and all of a sudden, you know, every day there will be 10 people parking on the property. It's kind of like, you know, if Cheyenne Village, when in its previous use, every day there were probably 10 or 15 cars that would come to service that community. And so,
So you're kind of looking for like a commercial parking because of the support personnel required at the home that would, is that what you're kind of
yeah,
asking
well,
for?
I'm saying, suggesting adequate parking to support the use.
Yeah.
You're talking about off-street parking or on-street parking.
As someone who used to enforce these regulations at the state level, what you look for is whether you've created an impediment to the FHAA, which means even if you say you allow it, if you have a condition or a requirement in there that is practically making it very, very difficult to actually get it permitted, then that is a violation of the FHAA. And so you couldn't have something in there that would be one only, or you shouldn't have something in there that is only applicable to group homes and not to similarly situated uses. That's the legal standard they look at. But you could have something in there that's getting at impacts. So if you could say that based off the number of residences or caretakers or what have you, parking should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, but shall be considered with similar uses. So what you couldn't do is say you get the group home application and you have this pretty flexible standard to which you judge the criteria and you say, well, sorry, you don't meet the parking, and you do that for every application. I would caution against that kind of standard that could be that flexible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like an example, one of the uses there is home for elderly people over 60, which I kind of want to protest that statement, but that's what's in this. Yeah, that's the state law, but I could imagine, a group home for, if it's 8 elderly that each have a car, it would be nice if there was, reasonable parking.
So the issue is that if you had a civil rights attorney argue it, they would say, are you going to require a parking spot for every single person in that family of the single family home across the street?
Yeah.
If you don't, then you just made a discriminatory practice and that whole provision will be stricken.
Okay, but we could require for support personnel. Okay. Gloria.
I'm just thinking about small daycare facilities that it seems like we if we're going to do this, they would fall under the same criteria. They might have 4 or 5 people who are working there, and then you've got parents and caregivers coming in and out. So it doesn't feel necessary to me to require that they have off-street parking.
Other thoughts?
Seriously. I mean, it sounds like it's a slippery slope between the law and.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe we leave it then. It's tricky unless, I think the attorney's nodding his head then. We're jumping on a third rail here. Okay, well, that's everything I have. Anybody else with things to?
Other business.
Well, yeah, but first we need to wrap this up. So, Gloria.
Oh, just a couple of things that came up in the community public input in the public meeting. I know some people are very interested in seeing a red line copy. We had that early on, and because the organization of the proposed code is organized differently than the other one, I don't know that it's helpful, but if people would like to see one, I would suggest maybe just a couple of them or putting it online or something like that, because I don't think it's as helpful as people believe it will be. And the notion of experimental section, To me, the code is supposed to be about our requirements, occasionally maybe about guidelines, but I don't see that anything related to experimental belongs written up in the code. And that's it.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've all spoken. So it sounds like we've come up with the notions, the things we want to sort of change, adjacencies, variance criteria. We talked about household, short-term rentals, and then a couple of dimensional standard tweaks that I suggested. And with that, I guess we need to vote to move the recommendation on with these findings. Would someone like to make a motion to move it on to council?
I so move.
Okay, we have a motion. Oh, actually, Steve, this is where you can't vote because you're, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Gary, are you going to make it? Mike?
I'll second it.
Who firsted? Oh, David. Okay. Motion and second. If there's no more discussion, let's vote. All in favor? Okay. And now just before we move on to the next item, I'll just have to say that I think we've made amazing progress in the last 6 months, and it would not have happened if we didn't have Hannah here. So thank you, Hannah. And now Mike has something he has to do.
This may be a case of mistaken identity, but I got an email from Elena Krebs. Said, Mr. Delwich has indicated that he would like to renew his term appointment. Would you mind bringing this up with the rest of your board and send it over whether you endorse his reappointment or not? I told her it would be a hard sell, but I think we can get it done. So I assume we're okay with him sticking around.
I will support that.
And then real quick, I went to city council last week to attend a meeting. Alan was at the pub. He couldn't make it. So it was just financial related. So we've got $1,400 to spend, which is $200 a head. So save your receipts. The council had some questions. They asked if they could do anything for us, which is a great question, but I couldn't come up with an answer. So maybe if you have any thoughts about that down the road. Another question was that we had processed 18 applications, and one council person said, is that low? And I said, based on experience, I thought it was. And then a comment was made to all the commissions and committees that we should focus on our goal versus our mission statement, which we have. So no need to discuss now, but that was a conversation. And finally, next month, I brought up before that I think we should have a 3-minute opportunity for the public to say anything they want in front of these meetings. And I think the consensus was if we want it, we can do it. So I would just like to put that on the agenda for next month. I'm just planting the seed. I think it's a good thing. And that's all I got.
Oh, and actually, if anybody didn't read the bulletin, Mike got bold quote.
Yeah, right. I saw that.
Yeah. Okay, so one more item. Hannah, do you want to talk about the time of the meeting?
Yes, I would like to propose that we start our meetings at 5:30 versus 6 o'clock. I wanted to gain or just get a sense for how you would feel about starting a little earlier. As you know, half of our department is actually hourly. And so only 2 of us are salaried. And when we work later and later into the evening, and maybe I have a staff member who's this subject matter expert on a particular application, that means paying them more and more. You know how that goes. And it's only a half an hour, but that tends to add up between all of our boards and stuff. So I just wanted to ask if this was something that you guys would be supportive of. If there's a concern that we wouldn't be allowing enough time for public to get to these meetings before 5:30, we can change the order of the agenda to do these types of updates ahead of the agenda items so that there still would be a closer to 6 o'clock start time for actual public items on an agenda, I guess, development review type stuff. So I wanted to fling that out there and just see what you guys thought.
It's okay with me.
Just so you know, they used to start at 7.
Yeah, I heard. I know that's a little tough.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're working to save the city's money.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know, I think the only one I see come in from work is Justin.
Justin, what's your thought?
That works for me. Yeah, I can make that work. So.
Great, thank you. You okay, Gloria, with it?
Yes.
Okay,
If I can make one more announcement. So just this past Friday, our senior planner, Chelsea Strongberg, took her AICP exam and passed. So now we have 2 AICP certified planners on staff. I want to plug her because their initial pass rate's only 60%, and it's even lower for a first time test taker. And this was her first time taking the test and passed with flying colors. So applause, Chelsea, if you ever listened to this. We have the job actively posted, and we're reviewing applicants. We may choose to keep the job posted if we feel like there isn't a good fit. So I'll keep you guys updated as we go through that process. That's accurate. So we do have a moratorium in place through the end of February. It's scheduled to be lifted on March 1st. If we keep to our timeline, that would give us a couple of weeks to make sure that we have the process in place and established and we're ready to accept new applications.
great. So is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Okay.